Welcome to Constantinople, the capital of the declining Byzantine Empire in the latest DLC for Europa Universalis 5, Fate of the Phoenix. My goal is simple: to restore the Roman Empire, with the help of ancient gods and the religion of Hellenism. However, the path to that goal is truly bumpy. Low stability, legitimacy is non-existent, I spend 8 times more than I earn. But that's not all. There are also 2 powerful crises that are practically impossible to prevent. Yes, this is going to be one of those campaigns. And to make it easier for you to follow, I've divided it into these stages. And if you yourself want to play Fate of the Phoenix and experience all the content Paradox has prepared for this country, I'd appreciate it if you use my affiliate link, which is in the description and the pinned comment, to purchase this DLC. I won't hide it, it's an incredible help to me if you do, because Paradox gives 4 times the cut compared to others. Of course, if you previously purchased the premium version, you already have this DLC. You can also purchase an upgrade to the premium version, where you get 4 DLCs at 20% off. The link to that offer is also in the description. Welcome Imperialists, Lucas here. Yes, I have to admit that Byzantium's starting situation is much more difficult than in the previous patch, but still manageable. Now I'll show you what needs to be done before unpausing to avoid collapsing with this country. Because even I had it happen a few times, despite already having spent quite a number of hours in this game. By collapse, I don't mean being conquered, but rather falling into a debt spiral and going bankrupt over and over again. Budget. By default, I set all taxes to automatic. And I set minting to a slight decrease in inflation. When it comes to expenses, there are quite a few new things here. Court maintenance stays at the minimum level, because if I wanted to increase legitimacy, it would cost a fortune. But don't worry, I'll show you how to raise legitimacy without paying for the court. Navy, forts and army maintenance go down. I also delete most forts. I only keep the one in the capital and this one here. Diplomatic expenses stay as they are, because I'll reduce them in another way. I set food expenses to 0, the remaining things will recalculate shortly and become much lower, and now it's time for bureaucracy expenses, which are best managed in the bureaucracy tab in the government panel. This is a mechanic where if you don't fund a given bureaucracy sector, you receive those penalties in the red fields. However, you always receive bonuses from the yellow fields. When you start funding a given bureaucracy sector, you gain increasing bonuses in the green fields, while the red ones decrease. You pay for bureaucracy with regular gold, but unfortunately its costs depend on the economic base, meaning that broken modifier which assumes you have 100% control in every location you own. Nice, right? Another bureaucracy I will fund is the Imperial Senate, because then I stop receiving the legitimacy penalty at a low cost. The other bureaucracies, in my opinion, are very situational, and I'll try to show when I use them. Rivals. Honestly, I'd like to have all these countries as my rivals, but Serbia, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire and that thing, research. This tech tree seems to have shrunk. The developers apparently do read the Paradox forum after all. Alright, I know they do, don't ban me there. Initially I go for diplomacy, then institution spread speed and culture, and after that just everything. I can enact 1 loss, so I ban the export of gold and silver, because the minting bonus will definitely come in handy. Advisors. At the start we have one, and there will be a series of events connected to him, unless you kill him. The advisor will focus on improving the communalism values for the empire, because this value allows you to revoke privileges 50% cheaper, and also increases support from all estates. After that, it's the standard legitimacy, stability, and finally uniquely improving religious influence. Because the reworked Orthodox religion now offers quite a few new possibilities, but it requires a huge amount of influence points. These bonuses for controlling locations are passive and work all the time, as long as they are controlled by an Orthodox nation. If you get them all, the bonuses are doubled. For now, I also don't hire advisors, until the government reform changes, because it currently increases state power by as much as 30%, and my authority as emperor is already minimal. This person can be assigned at most to the army or navy, but definitely not to the cabinet, because he stops being a family member when that ruler dies, and we know he'll die very quickly. He's already got a runny nose. Children's education? I just ignore it. At least let the heir go for administrative education. Privileges. Unfortunately, each estate still has a privilege that we must revoke, which costs quite a lot of stability points, and also requires 95 legitimacy. At this moment, I'm not granting any new privileges either, but I will soon. Now, the most important thing, vassals. I create 2 historical vassals, as pronoia, because each pronoia adds legitimacy points. Additionally, there is a chance I will regain that territory for free if the dynasty ruling that country dies out. Then I create subject states from provinces, also as pronoia, but here I try to assign women aged around 40 or older, because then they have a low chance of having children, and at age 60 they have a high chance of dying early. Now that I have all my vassals, I transfer a neighboring province to Upper Macedonia. I do the same with a few other vassals as well. Essentially, my territories end up looking like this, but no, this is not a 2-province tactic to prevent that disaster. Because honestly, I want it. I do this mainly because Paradox made transferring provinces to neighbors more difficult. And now, when I want to sell a province on which I have a core, I unfortunately lose 20 stability points. And that's a lot. However, the main reason is simply to reduce the country's maintenance costs. And now the second most important thing. I impose an embargo on every country I plan to go to war with. That is the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria, Serbia. Alright, I also want to fight these countries, but they are weak enough that I don't need an embargo. And look, at this moment, the Ottomans have 7,000 levies and 2 forts. You'll see what happens to them as soon as I unpause the game, which is basically happening right now, because the first crises are ahead of me once I have to survive thanks to war. And look, just as soon as the game started, how my expenses dropped. And yes, only now do I check which buildings I can disable. By clicking this option in the building. No, please do not disable the Sargenty, that's suicide. And I know it's very tempting to increase minting, but that will massively slow down future development. Meanwhile, on May 1st, 2 key events take place. The Turkish threat increases, which fortunately no longer additionally reduces stability. And Byzantium enters a new crisis that will determine the future fate of the Phoenix, whether it will rise from the ashes or simply die. And despite this crisis, I could still get a second crisis, because why not? While I still had some money, I went on a pilgrimage to Constantinople because it's close. I don't know if you've heard of it or been there, nice metropolis, where I could also enact certain laws, though that cost legitimacy points. I also begin improving relations with the papacy, because I can ask them for money once they accumulate 500 gold. Now I'm waiting for this icon to disappear. Wow! And that event to get rid of that troublesome government system happened really quickly. Now it's much better. In June, the fort disappeared. And in a magical way, the Ottomans lost 2000 levies. And this is the moment when I attack using the best casus belli. That is, no casus belli, war. Unfortunately, that fort in the capital never disappears for the Ottoman Empire. It will have to be taken. For army commander, you need to assign someone with the highest administrative skill, because it speeds up province sieges. Set the army to allow vassals to attach, and for the vassals themselves choose the option that makes them attached to that army. And just as my army was ready to march into battle, many bad things happened. My vassal might soon have a civil war. A smallpox epidemic broke out in the area, and an earthquake struck Constantinople. Just another day in Byzantium. But I don't give up, and the emperor himself is carrying out a very important reform. And look at the 2 incredibly powerful cabinet actions he gains. Despite the plague, I march into battle. And literally after a second, I get one of the most important events. About a co-emperor, who is actually our advisor I mentioned earlier. I could abandon this idea and receive some minor bonuses. But a far more interesting path is to convince that minister to co-rule with us. And surely nothing bad will happen. However, the most interesting things happen when you don't release any vassals in Greece. I did it anyway. So at most, in your campaign, you'll have the chance to see what happens. Time for the first battle, where I had numerical superiority, which is, of course, a win, strength in numbers, then a quick occupation, then an ambush and a second battle. Also a victory. The worst part is chasing the remnants of that Ottoman army. But now I've completely destroyed that army. And I could end this war, if not for the capital. So I'll spend the rest of this war simply on minimal maintenance of everything. In the meantime, I begin building spy networks in Bulgaria and Serbia. I also remove that fort, since I won't need it anymore, and now the first event resulting from this man being our co-emperor. A Frankish delegation has arrived seeking my help in conquering Greece, and I will agree to it. Then, in the year 1338, several things happened. The Ottoman Empire capitulated, literally, because Paradox added such an option. and I don't know how bad of a person you have to be to place the total capitulation option right under the peace deal option. Yes, I've already clicked it a few times, never mind. What matters is that another crisis has begun, a succession crisis, but this event might actually work in my favor, because you know, hard times create strong people. I end the war with the Ottoman Empire by conquering all its territory. Unfortunately, due to my bad luck and the second crisis starting, I cannot release any vassals. That option is simply blocked here, so I now have to integrate these territories normally. However, the first Byzantine conquests in centuries have given me as much as 10 prestige. And reclaiming Nicomedia itself leads to increased splendor of the Roman Empire, which positively affects for as long as 20 years the satisfaction of all estates, and the growth of legitimacy, unless you prefer an additional cabinet advisor, which is also very strong. I, however, prefer legitimacy growth. Right after my great victory, merchants from Genoa and Venice arrived seeking special treatment. Of course, I diplomatically refused them. That decision also strengthened my legitimacy. And more importantly, my victory over the Ottomans in Anatolia now gives me access to a special new option. I can demand tribute from Turkish states, and I gain 20 legitimacy points. See, I promised I'd show you how to increase legitimacy without spending money on it. Nevertheless, part of the legitimacy I have just gained, I have to spend. More precisely, I want to ask the Catholic Pope to give me a donation, and I received over 300 gold. I won't hide it, a weight has been lifted off my shoulders, because these will solve part of my problems. It's a pity that I can only repeat this option once every 5 years. With Catholic ducats, I am repaying all my debt. And honestly speaking, this is quite a good moment to slightly increase coin minting, even if I get inflation, so that I end up at a very slight deficit now. Part of the population, after my victories, started supporting me, which further strengthened my legitimacy. I honestly use that to grant privileges to the common people, which will positively affect the size of my levy. I simply need peasants who will die for me. My co-emperor turned out to have a hidden financial ability. He was literally a fiscal hawk. Thanks to that, I will be able to mint coins even more effectively, as well as borrow money at a lower interest rate. And so I kept playing with my budget sliders to stay slightly in the positive, until the first National Assembly, or rather the Senate. And it is definitely worth making sure, before convening parliament, that you are spending money on the Imperial Senate, because that will increase base support. And I have an empire to reform. There is also one new action here, reducing bureaucracy costs, however, I will deal with that later. First, the laws. Byzantium has the administrative pronoia system, which reduces tax income, and at this moment every penny counts, so I changed this law to basically anything else. Next, the only thing I am building are RGOs, especially the one for food, because I really don't want to spend money on supplying granaries. And I have to do it, because otherwise I was losing almost 1,000 citizens per month. Just before the end of the parliament session, I also put forward a parliamentary claim on my neighbor, who will be the target of my conquest. My younger son got a really decent trade. Now I just had to somehow get rid of the older son. But actually I had a better question. Why is my emperor still alive? That happens very rarely. To further improve my finances, I decided to get rid of the fleet. As soon as I lost my wooden wall, Genoa took my island. I will come back for it. And just as I said, hard times create great men, like this absolute Chad. And although I would like him to be my military commander, no, let him work for the benefit of the administration. Unfortunately, a revolt broke out in Epirus. Just so you know, I am playing on a pre-release version where such strange bugs occur. Bug reported, I hope you won't encounter it. Unfortunately, that revolt in Epirus is the result of earlier events that I am currently unable to do anything about. So at least for now, Epirus becomes a free country. I will come back here. Meanwhile, I am dealing with the war against the Karasids. And unfortunately, when my emperor was leading the army to war, this happened. My empress must have taken the title of co-emperor a bit too literally, because I was supposed to share only the duties of ruling, not the bed. But there is actually nothing wrong with it, because while getting rid of this man will annoy the nobility a bit, it will weaken their power by as much as 50%. And for another 20 years on top of that, and the advisor himself will join the clergy estate. These minor Turkish principalities in Anatolia are honestly weak opponents. The war was simply very quick. And right after it, Venetian merchants came to me, making an offer I couldn't refuse. Almost 1,000 gold. For renting out the jewels of the Byzantine crown. And looking at my very poor financial situation, I simply agreed. They'll return them, right? For Byzantium, I reclaimed another very important location, the port of Smyrna. and I can either rebuild it, which would give incredibly large bonuses to the development of this location, but I think this bonus is better, because we will rebuild the great market in this location, which will significantly increase my market access, and the other bonuses are quite nice as well. Just look, 10 levels for free. And so, after my first successes in Anatolia, it was time to deal with my Balkan neighbors, because their power is growing stronger. The first target was the Kingdom of Bulgaria, which stood alone in this war, so I declared war on them, claiming the return of provinces. Then while I was crushing the Bulgarian armies, bad news reached me. The Venetians deceived me and decided not to return the imperial jewels, and we all know as men how important jewels are. I will come back for them, because they are indeed in Venice. After the first victory in the war with Bulgaria, I still proceeded cautiously, because I wanted to destroy the rest of their army, before that army destroys my foolish vassals, who are not joining my main forces. And it worked. I seized the opportunity and engaged the Bulgarian army in battle. Come on, fight, peasants, fight! A beautiful victory, surprisingly beautiful. I slaughtered them, and honestly, in this war I am reclaiming only part of my old territory, plus some bonus land, as well as a lot of gold and war reparations. I also forced the Bulgarians to destroy all fortifications. The Bulgarians funded my royal gardens. And so, more years passed, until the year 1342, when the Renaissance began. Honestly, for the first time in my EU5 career, I will choose the military path, because, of course, the stronger the army, the more tolerant the country. And note, I am not entirely sure whether what I am planning will work out, so you will find the answer later in the video, so if you want a standard solution like an administrative approach, go ahead. In the Renaissance era, I want to invent a better levy as soon as possible, which means that my research from the previous era must be cancelled. Now I turn to the Serbs, where I am hoping that the forces of Wallachia will not realistically join this war. The fate of this war was decided very quickly in a large battle which I barely won. From the Serbs, I conquered a lot of territory. I also forced them to hand over substantial funds and dismantled their fortresses. A silver mine as well as a gold mine came into my possession. Maybe I am not directly profiting from them right now, but at least I don't have a problem with minting coins. Right after that, a Turkish rebellion broke out, which was so pathetic that I defeated it without much trouble. So yes, the Balkan threat has been stopped. Serbia and Bulgaria will never again be strong enough to pose a threat to me. And my attention turned once again toward Anatolia, because I wanted to prevent the rise of some Turkish empire. I decided on quite a large war. Why do I have peace with them here? Well then, there will be no war. And maybe it was a sign to slow down because the country does need rest, especially since during the next parliament I got this agenda to reduce inflation. Money machine goes brr, and I even managed to put forward one more claim, which I use immediately by declaring war. After all, my country has rested enough. So once again, my surprisingly still alive emperor set out to find the enemy army and crush them in successive battles. Ultimately wiping those armies out, they literally have no strength left. So now, the most important thing for me was to capture the provincial capitals as quickly as possible. During this war I noticed one thing: I can loot. More precisely, I think I am looting some buildings that were previously built by the nobility. Nice change. Despite my growing power, this is also the moment when I have to start improving relations with nearby empires, so that they do not form a coalition against me. Because it is already slowly growing. And it has even been formed. And the best part is, at the moment, I cannot disband my army. Because as a result of unfortunate events, I angered the peasantry. And that means I literally have zero levy. And literally I had to use an advisor to improve relations with them as quickly as possible, and then the Black Death arrived. During the plague, I decided to only segregate the sick, because it will simply strengthen interpersonal bonds even more. The worst part of all this is that I had just begun rebuilding the country, and now it is burning again. Maybe at least I will be lucky and that pretender to the throne will die, because that is probably the only way to end this crisis. The plague itself took 1 million citizens from me, and in the meantime I took Epirus. And once again I encouraged my citizens to settle in Constantinople, because it became somewhat deserted. Cheap housing for everyone. The pretender to the throne died shortly after, unfortunately of old age. Surprisingly, my emperor was still alive, and yes, that definitely ends the succession crisis. Unfortunately, I made a very big mistake here, because the reward for ending this crisis depends on crown power. And I have little of it. I could have fixed it very easily by adjusting a few things in the bureaucracy, which would have immediately given me almost 30% crown power. But well, his death surprised me, so I didn't manage to move those two sliders in time. However, the good side of all this was that I could once again create vassals. And actually, I could use bureaucracy and strong crown for other things, revoke privileges, because it now costs only 50 points. Well, for the nobility, because for the others it is even cheaper. And so I really start by revoking a privilege from the nobility. I have very advanced serfdom. And it is the nobility that earns me money, not the peasants. And with such high income, I even slightly reduce coin minting, because my goal is to reduce inflation as quickly as possible to build buildings more cheaply. Although for now, it is mainly the social estates that are constructing new buildings. Oh, and I finally also hire advisors. Half a year later, while suppressing a certain Turkish rebellion, my ruler finally dies. Unfortunately, the heir to the throne, as you remember, was an idiot. So now Byzantium faces another difficult period. To lift my mood, I created a lot of new vassals. I gave them territories mainly in the interior of the country and kept the coastline for myself to integrate. However, I was quite surprised when it turned out that I could not immediately change their religion or culture. I had to wait 10 years. Oh well. I still had old vassals to integrate, so I began improving relations with them. Shortly after, I conquered the last lands in Anatolia to which I had territorial claims. And so, now ahead of me was a conflict with the Italian states, which had taken advantage of Byzantium's earlier weakness and seized part of the Byzantine holdings in the Balkans. However, before these wars take place, the empire must consolidate. It must also develop its economy and definitely expand the fleet, which is exactly what I will deal with now, and it will not turn out to be an easy task after the changes in the economy. Because most of the buildings I can construct practically generate no income for me. And on the Byzantine market there is a massive oversupply of many goods, so this is definitely a moment when my country was suffocating. The only good news was that I had just solved the inflation problem, so I could mint more coin. And in the near future I will continue building RGOs, because they are the most profitable. And from what I can see, the country is still recovering from the plague. I also began rebuilding the Thema system from scratch. Not only will it increase the source of proximity in every location where I can build it, but it will also increase my manpower, at the cost of a fairly small loss of local crown power. Admittedly, I do not have many such locations because I can only build this structure in cities and towns that are also provincial capitals. But even constructing these buildings will increase the demand for those goods, because the player, as the state, still pays only 20% of the maintenance costs. But with a small change, because inflation also affects maintenance costs, I am also restoring the Pronoia system. And that is because after 1360 I have a chance for an event that reforms this system. Although those chances are very small, expanding the economy does not mean that I will not fight small wars in the meantime, because now I am moving on to another war with the Turkish principalities. Okay, this will actually be a large war, so I will need a distraction, and I also increase my regular army with vanguards, although now my opponents have much smaller forces than I do. The Byzantine infantry turned out to be very effective. However, these wars will drag on. I cannot conquer much territory at once, because at this moment I am not yet ready for a conflict with the Mamluk Sultanate, and already now, even though I have improved over 100 relations with them, I am only slightly at +10. And that means I have close to 100 points of antagonism with them, but at least no one can forbid me from raiding these states. I also had some luck, and one of the Pronoia principalities was annexed, meaning their local dynasty died out. And that was a very pleasant surprise, because it was a province with gold. And yes, I was still benefiting from papal money, because sometimes I even received 500 gold. After another 5 years, I revoked the last negative privilege. Thanks to that, I in a way end the dominance of the social estates in the empire. And my production buildings finally start generating income, which of course reminded me of one new mechanic that I showed you at the beginning. Namely, I turned Constantinople into a center of production for all kinds of textiles, which massively increased the income from this location. And I ordered my best advisor to perform that action that accelerates research by as much as 50% and also cultural influence by 50%. This is probably one of the strongest cabinet actions at the moment. And yes, I didn't forget about reforming the country either. I won't hide it, I had a very fortunate parliament in that regard. My ruler also decided that this was quite a good moment to reform the monetary system, where copper and silver would be used for minting coins instead of gold. It must be admitted that was a very modern economic idea. But seriously, regardless, I plan to shift quite quickly toward a capitalist economy to further increase the efficiency of my tailors, because at the moment they are generating enormous revenue for my budget. Besides, at this point I also noticed that a city can have much more than just one urban right. So additionally, in Constantinople I grant maritime rights, which will increase harbor capacity. Harbor capacity is incredibly important for the empire to expand its proximity. With the invention of a new type of galley, I began expanding the new Byzantine fleet. In the army for now, I have abandoned professional infantry. In its place, I will build Byzantine heavy cavalry, which will support the levies. And now, when my capital was developing rapidly and providing enormous income to the budget, this happened. My ruler finally reformed the pronoia system. It took him some time. Now, as Byzantium, I will be able to choose from 3 paths of reforming this system. And honestly, considering how many vassals I have, for now I will simply reform the system. But ultimately, I will eventually move toward the heavy cavalry. Now I have to record Poland focused on cavalry and Byzantine hussars. For the next 5 years, I spared no expense on expanding Constantinople. Meanwhile, in other locations I began building more markets to start increasing trade advantage. Because when I produce so many textiles, and cheap ones at that, it's worth starting to export them worldwide. I even set it so that my market now tries to export at least half of my production abroad. And here's a small pro tip for you. I don't know why Paradox designed it this way, but I can't choose any arbitrary good to import or export. By default, only 5 are visible, but with each click a new good appears, and I do it in such a way that I find the one I need and then remove the rest. It's a bit of a strange solution, but I'll be honest, I won't be adjusting it that often anyway. Right away my entire trade focuses on exporting cheap textiles. I also built a fleet of 2 groups of 20 ships. Well, a few are still under construction, and these are all war galleys. For transporting the army, I will use fishing boats. I also have 2 regiments of heavy cavalry, as well as 21,000 levies. So the time has come to reclaim my former Balkan possessions. First, from Sicily. By threatening war, I demanded the return of territories because yes, I am once again a great power. I want Athens returned, and fortunately Sicily does not agree to this. My plan was also to secure a foothold in Sicily and maybe Rome itself, because this war was quite large. At the beginning, I allowed enemy armies to land on my territory because my great Byzantine army crushed those smaller armies to dust until Sicily lost its entire army. Only then did I order my fleet to destroy the enemy fleets. And when I captured the last Balkan fortresses, all that remained was to land my great army in Sicily, which was essentially defenseless, so it quickly fell into my hands. Intoxicated by victory, I secured passage through Naples and ordered my troops to march straight to Rome, where they even arrived and began the siege. It was a very difficult siege, especially because I had to supply my entire army by sea, since it quickly consumed all available supplies. And unfortunately, just when I thought the siege had gained momentum and I would soon capture Rome, this happened. Suddenly they somehow mustered 40,000 levies. Alright, the papacy is a wealthy nation, so they probably hired mercenaries. So I decided to settle for a foothold in Sicily, as well as reclaiming all Sicilian territories in the Balkans. I decided to strengthen my foothold in Italy by building fortresses there, which also had a positive impact on the development of the conquered location. The annexation of Greek territory also turned out to be more effective than I expected. And this event is possible thanks to the fact that I previously chose a co-emperor who agreed to Frankish intervention in Greece, useful. However, ahead of me was a much more difficult war with Naples, which had a larger army as well as quite strong allies. Nevertheless, I also demanded the return of my former territories. This time, however, I approached the war differently. I leave the Balkan battles to my vassals, let that swarm finally be of some use, and as for me, I am transporting my army to Sicily. Although that probably wasn't a good plan, because my vassals weren't doing too well in the war. Meanwhile, I had little trouble defeating the Neapolitan forces in Sicily and moved to occupy their territory. However, surprisingly, I constantly had supply issues and had to keep my great fleet nearby. That was a sign that I probably need to invest in supply wagons. In several battles, I defeated the army of Naples, and to my surprise, Naples simply surrendered completely. So this time, maybe I will finally manage to take Rome. Who captured this? In the meantime, let's briefly return to my territory because I finally managed to build a local governor in Thessaloniki. So yes, I now have access to that gold mine, which will have 100% control. And as we know, a gold mine solves budget problems. During the conquest of Rome, supply once again proved to be the biggest issue. I simply had to transport food from Sicily. And honestly, the fact that Naples capitulated bothered me a lot, because war exhaustion started to rise very quickly, and that affected the efficiency of my production. But finally, Rome fell. As a result, I can take the entire province of Rome a lot of money, as well as war reparations, and no one even cares. Because of this, I gain a bonus for the Patriarchate in Rome. From Naples itself, I gain all former possessions in the Balkans, along with a lot of money. And for now, that's it. Because these territorial gains suddenly anger everyone. You capture the holy city of the most powerful religion in Europe and no one cares. You capture a few Balkan villages and the world burns because they hate you. Fortunately, reclaiming Rome itself was rewarded with progress in integrating these locations. But unfortunately, the year 1401 was approaching, and that meant that the future of the Phoenix would soon be decided. Nevertheless, the economy is doing quite well. I have a stable country with maximum legitimacy, and Constantinople is a true jewel in the crown. Here, I am still mainly focused on textile production, but other goods have also been added. I must admit, no other city I own is as wealthy as the capital. However, when the year 1401 finally arrived, two very important things happened. The threat of the Turks uniting and forming a powerful empire passed, and my Byzantine Empire was reborn, stronger than ever before, and honestly, as a reward, I receive a lot of extremely powerful bonuses, comparable to the Oirat mission tree in EU4. And every EU4 player knows how overpowered that tree is. We receive one of the most powerful casus belli in the game for restoring Rome. A similar casus belli only appears after 1700, although it is limited only to the area of Rome. But even so, that's about 1/3 of the known world. As a reward, I also retain these two extremely powerful cabinet actions. And if I hadn't forgotten to reform the army, there was an option here that gave me some small bonuses in exchange for money. I would now have a much better and longer lasting bonus. Two new bureaucracies, where one bureaucracy grants an additional governor slot and the other increases peasant wealth and prosperity. So you can have quite a lot of fun with this Byzantium. But best of all, the form of government has been upgraded, giving me a more efficient cabinet. So yes, I didn't just save Byzantium, I rebuilt it. I have a fairly solid economy and army, although there is still quite a lot left for me to do here, which will happen while restoring Rome. To restore Rome, I will need to conquer much of Italy, and unfortunately, those territories will turn out to be more of a problem than a benefit for me. However, before I began my conquests, I spent 15 years catching up on certain things in Byzantium. In the existing cities and towns, I had to make up for buildings such as libraries, universities, granaries, and markets. Basically, everything I usually build. This had a very positive impact on the country's tax base, which is probably visible. Now, however, I am moving on to military actions, and the first country I will attack is Venice, from which I wanted to recover the jewels. I started the war with a landing on Crete. However, the war quickly took an unfavorable turn as more republics and kingdoms began joining it. I spent a good 3 years successively removing all those smaller countries from the war, simply for a white peace, but the number of enemies kept growing. So in the end, I settled for capturing Crete itself, and a few other smaller islands, especially since my once mighty Byzantine fleet was reduced to 12 ships, so unfortunately I failed to recover the jewels. As soon as I rebuilt the fleet, after 4 years I attacked Sicily again. In this war, I once again fought against the Papists, only this time the Pope had moved his capital to Avignon. However, I was surprised when Venice joined this war, which I of course took advantage of and reclaimed the jewels. My little treasures returned home, plus a small bonus. In fact, I decided not to leave Venice, and I conquered it for myself. I forbade my armies from looting this beautiful city. It is meant to generate income as quickly as possible. And finally, I conquered the rest of Sicily, where a rebellion broke out after a month. And I hadn't even removed the forts here. At least after that rebellion, I noticed that forts now reduce unrest in a location. And so I entered the Age of Discovery. where I focused on administrative actions, mainly to increase trade capacity and gain a bonus to province integration. I have a feeling this will be useful. Then I immediately started a war with Naples. I sent my armies from Sicily straight to the first Neapolitan fortresses. At this point, I already had fully regular armies with the following composition: heavy cavalry, infantry, artillery and supply wagons. However, to gain the full bonus from army composition, I also needed light cavalry and light infantry. My campaign in Italy also led to army reform. Previously, Byzantine forces were heavily dependent on the nobility, whereas the army should be directly subordinate to the emperor. This allowed me to change the bureaucratic themata system into a strategachy, which, for example, affected naval and army traditions, and also gave a chance for better generals. To support my vassals' forces, I also decided to raise a levy, which I then split into two armies and simply ordered them to conquer Serbia. I have more important matters, like winning battles in Italy. After that, I focused on besieging fortresses, which fell very quickly, thanks to the spy network I had built in Naples. During wars, I would also temporarily switch my advisors so they would promote belligerent values, because that simply allows me to conquer more. This time I take nothing from bystander countries. It's better to attack them separately, there will be less antagonism that way, although making peace with the Serbs was a mistake as it cut me off from the rest of my enemies. I now had to use the fleet for landings. My troops had a massive advantage over enemies in the field. I simply inflicted 10 times greater losses and completely shattered them. As a result of my first war with Naples, I captured about half of the country. I do not release any vassals here, I integrate all territories. I was already close to forming Rome. Taking advantage of a long period of peace, I granted further privileges to the peasants, increasing the value of free subjects. It is clear that Byzantium's wealth lies in its cities, so I will aim to develop them as quickly as possible, which means that over time I will have higher control. So eventually I will extract higher taxes from the peasants, because I am not concerned with their well-being, especially since goods from Constantinople are beginning to spread across all of Europe. My invasion of Rhodos actually served to capture papal territory in Italy. I also took some land from Bulgaria, and finally the Knights of Rhodes themselves, during the second war with Naples, which was really easy. I also conquered half of Serbia, because I needed silver. And thanks to the Orthodox Synod, which further reduced my conquest costs, I conquered the rest of Naples. Unfortunately, this could already result in a fairly large coalition, but who would worry about that, when after these wars I had effectively taken half of Italy. And to be honest, these conquests marked the end of a certain stage, because I could now form the Roman Empire. But that would create a problem, because forming Rome would push me strongly toward Romanism values. And yes, they are incredibly powerful, but I need to increase them to 90 points. Because to restore the Hellenistic religion, aside from stability costs and religious influence, I must also meet these requirements. Capture all the holy sites of that religion, and have 90 points of either Romanism or Hellenism. And honestly, it is much easier to gain Romanism. So now I am moving on to the next stage, where I will show you how to obtain it. And honestly, it will turn out to be more difficult than I thought, because I made one mistake. Unfortunately, several holy sites were located in the territory of my vassals, and that did not count as if they were in my possession. So first of all, I simply have to integrate them. Then I still have some minor conquests ahead of me in Egypt, which has holy sites at least in Alexandria, Siwa, and somewhere else. The problem, however, is that Egypt has an army 4 times larger than mine. And the growing Italian coalition against me was not making things any easier, so I couldn't afford to just engage in a bloody war with Egypt, because that would trigger a coalition war. Also, because I had a lot of vassals that I wanted to annex as efficiently as possible, my diplomatic expenses were quite high. So in the future, I need to find something other than a vassal-based meta. Fortunately, I had several useful parliaments that helped me integrate locations in Italy more quickly. I placed the governor in Italy in Naples, because it spread control quite effectively, at least in locations with access to a port or where I remembered to establish a port city. Nevertheless, the conquest of Italy caused my bureaucracy expenses to rise dramatically, so I decided to get rid of them. The first thing I removed was the Imperial Senate. It cost me the most legitimacy. I think I will also undertake several other radical reforms, so for now I also have to spend a lot on stability in order to raise it as quickly as possible, and then eliminate further bureaucracies. And I must admit, there are several new bureaucracies that I would gladly adopt, but honestly their costs are intimidating for now. One of the more important laws I have just discovered is new city right. They have an incredible impact on what is produced in a given city, and it really looks quite interesting. Location specialization can provide a lot of fun, especially when, after 150 years of gameplay, I discovered that a city can have more than one city right. In Constantinople, I increased textile production by as much as 70%, so I began to significantly increase their export. And although I didn't make much money from trade, the local price of textiles nearly doubled. It was satisfying to watch the tax revenue in Constantinople grow, which, by the way, expanded significantly. Restoring stability took me another 15 years because I ultimately removed as many as 2 bureaucracies. The ones I have kept for now are simply tolerable. And I must admit, this significantly improved my budget. Before the war with the Mamluks, I decided to take the rest of Anatolia. I also received several events, in which I chose the option of moving toward Hellenism. And honestly, without these events, it would have been extremely difficult to accumulate that many points. Besides, they seem very random. Now I was facing a war with the greatest power in the region. Literally, Egypt has an army 3 times larger than mine. Of course, I also forgot to recover my forces after the war for Anatolia, so at the beginning I took a defensive position and started hiring mercenaries who were meant to serve as cannon fodder, because I could afford it. And while my armies were fighting levies, I was winning without any problem. Even so, the Egyptian army consisted of as many as 53,000 regular troops and nearly 80,000 manpower reserves. Does anyone remember what the balance of forces was at the start of the war? Unfortunately, when it came to clashes between regular armies, things were no longer so cheerful. So I adopted a tactic where, whenever I captured Mamluk regular troops, I would send those units to my rear so they would remain there until the end of the war, instead of ransoming them for money. There we go, another 10 points of Hellenism. Returning to the war, I carried out a massive slaughter here, so I launched an offensive. But in the end, despite inflicting such enormous losses on Egypt, I unfortunately no longer had the strength to continue the war. But fortunately, I was able to capture all the locations with the holy sites that I needed. Along the way, I also captured several holy cities for Orthodoxy. And fortunately, right after finishing the war with the Mamluks, I got the final event for the missing 10 points. So now I can restore Hellenism. And best of all, Paradox has now introduced mechanics that spread religion or culture. And look at how powerful this is. My new religion will now spread faster among these social groups, as well as among populations that speak Greek and Latin. And in my country, everyone speaks Greek. Unfortunately, it spreads a bit slower among the peasantry. And honestly, Hellenism is one of the stronger religions. The base religion alone already has very strong modifiers. For example, we now have access to free labor in RGOs. It is also characterized by very high tolerance for both non-believers and heretics. Because of this, I am not far from not having to convert my country at all. And that is exactly why, in the first era, I chose military ideas. There are also plenty of additional actions to perform using influence points. One of the most important is the pilgrimage, because it allows you to gain incredible amounts of influence points. For a good start, 65. One of the key things to spend influence points on is the aspect of faith. Initially we have monism, which slightly reduces the strength of omens, more on that in a moment, but for now it speeds up conversion and increases tolerance. Besides that, there are really many such aspects. Omens themselves are essentially prayers to a given deity, which are more effective the more capable our ruler is, or if we have used the appropriate aspect. We choose which deity we want to pray to. If you hover here, there is a list of all omens and which deity must be prayed to for them to activate. And when I pray to a god, a window like this opens. And a certain number of omens are drawn from those available to that deity, in this case 3. And honestly, extra legitimacy is always welcome. And yes, you can have several omens active at once, you just need religious influence. However, each deity can provide only one omen at a time. Omens last for 10 years. Returning to aspects, some of them push our country toward Romanism. That's why I first wanted to restore this religion. New research related to this religion has also been added, then I waited a few years, mainly increasing stability in the country and accumulating money. And I must admit, the Hellenism movement is spreading quite well. It already affects 100 locations. Of course, I am also helping with conversions. And now the time has come to restore the Roman Empire. So yes, the Roman Empire has been reborn, unfortunately, with its capital in Rome, and that complicates many things, especially if I want to move in that direction of values, because then I simply need to have the capital in Rome. This is shown here in the values. And honestly, I would like to shift the values toward the Roman ones, at least to gain 1/10 of a point in their direction, because that would trigger a Romanism restoration movement, which would function similarly to Hellenism. And once that movement emerges, I could restore the Roman legions. And if you want me to do that and march with the armies of this beautiful Rome to reclaim its full borders, let me know in the comments and leave a like. And in the meantime, I invite you to watch this episode of Victoria 3, where I play the latest DLC and show step by step how to reform Japan, which was not an easy task.